One of the questions I get asked most often about Lake's Folly is actually the name. How on earth did Dr. Max Lake come up with the name Lake's Folly? I mean, where does the folly come from?
When Max started, I mean, Lake's Folly is the first boutique winery in Australia. So when it started, Max came up and chose the site. And at that time, there were only the old landholders that were around the place, you know, the guys like the Tyrrells and Draytons, Elliots, Tullocks, fellas like that. And he was the talk of the valley, you know, this Pitt Street farmer that was going to come up here and, you know, what the hell would he know about growing grapes? And, have you heard this idiot's planting Cabernet? What a fool. Yeah. So Max got wind of this.
And I should just say, you know, to those, you know, watching today that the 100's traditional varieties are Semillon and Shiraz.
For sure.
And,
for sure.
Cabernet's a big break away from that.
It is, yeah. And the rest of them will get on track eventually, Jeremy, you know. But no, it's so when he came up and did that, he thought, okay, well, if I'm a fool, then this must be my folly. And so Lake's Folly was born.
It's the name, yeah. And since then, it's actually really justified itself. I find myself taking the wines around Asia quite a lot and serving the red in particular in front of people who really have developed very sophisticated palates for Bordeaux. Yeah. And they look at this wine, they taste it, and they go, my goodness me. Yeah. You know, that's got all the elegance and the balance and structure. That it's clearly not a Bordeaux, but it has, you know, it ticks a lot of the quality boxes.
And I think, thank you, that's lovely to hear. And I think that that's the case. I think that we do make a really elegant, refined style of wine that has amazing longevity. And that's a great compliment to be likened to Bordeaux. And I know that was what Max was sort of chasing. And I do think that the wine is more European in style than Australian in style necessarily. It is an old world style, and it's low in alcohol. I mean, some of these wines, a lot of these Cabernets were 11.2 to 12.5% alcohol, and that was just what the vineyard gave us. It wasn't in pursuit of low alcohol wines. It was just when that wine ripened at its optimum and was picked on, because everything on the place is done. Nothing's done to a recipe. Everything's done. The grapes are picked on flavour. We use hydrometers and we use pH meters, but they're not the determining factor as to when we pick our grapes. That's all done on taste. And I'll go out in the vineyard and I'll taste through individual areas of the vineyard and say, right, I want those 8 rows picked and they will make up one vat. And then I want you to stop at that row and I want you to go across here and I want you to pick the next 9 rows down there. And that's what we do in terms of, I touched on the philosophy before, that's what I think separates us and to a lot of places where places have viticulturalists that grow grapes and they have winemakers that make wine. And the viticulturalists are rewarded by how many grapes they can produce, and the winemakers are rewarded by how many gold medals they can slap on a bottle. But the two don't go hand in glove. So the old style of winemaking, where the winemaker was actually the vigneron, and he would be responsible for driving the tractor, for growing the grapes, for putting the sprays on, for harvesting the grapes, for making the wine, for coming out in cellar door in his gumboots and serving customers. That's what Lake's Folly represents. We are very much an estate with an estate philosophy and a very high quality focus to make the best single site wines.
And your job description sounds rather broad. It's not just sitting in a cellar, sort of moving wine from tank to tank.
I'm chief cook and bottle wash, you know. We just do whatever we can, and that's a lot of the appeal of the place. I love dealing with customers. I love having that control. And I'm so fortunate because the gentleman that owns Lake's Folly, Peter Fogarty, allows me that autonomy. And without that, I wouldn't be able to do the job that I do.
But he's also shown a lot of trust in you because since you've been there has been a refinement, perhaps, of style. How would you describe, what you've done, what you've contributed?
I downplay that, and I'm not seeking pats on the back. I downplay that because I think that the inherent quality of the wines comes from the vineyard, and all I'm really doing is taking it from A to B. Now, that said, someone shot me down in flames once and they said, well, that's all well and good, but when I go into my coffee shop and I order a coffee, if my barista's not there to make that coffee, and someone else is there, they're using the same coffee with the same grind, they're frothing the same milk, but that coffee's not as good as when the other barista makes it. Yeah. So there is a winemaker influence, but I do think that largely it comes from the vineyard, and that's where the focus is. And that's the same with the greatest wines in the world.
But you've done a lot of work in the vineyard with varietal mix. Maybe just a couple of words on what you've done there, because I agree with you.
Yeah.
That's really where the changes come through. Once the fruit is in the cellar, it's a custodian's role.
Yes.
And all the work, as you say, is in the vineyard. So what have you done there that's really made an
Well,
impression?
look, I mean, I'm afforded the luxury where if I have a year where where there's too much fruit, I can just go and drop it on the ground. And that could equate to a $250,000 decision. But there's no one over my shoulder saying to me, no, you can't do that, like you would have in a large company where you would have to justify those sort of decisions. Everything is based purely on a qualitative assessment, and it's like, okay, well, if the grapes aren't good enough, then we're not going to pick them. Yeah. Or if that vine isn't going to ripen that amount of fruit, and I need to drop half that fruit on the ground to get the remaining fruit to its optimum, well, then that's what we do. And there's no voice in the back of your head saying, no, you can't do that. So that's a great luxury.
But with a varietal perspective, have you changed the varietal mix of the wine a little bit?
Yeah, well, Max did that with the red wine. Max started off, it was all Cabernet, and he wanted to have some Bordeaux varieties in there. He wanted to have Malbec and Merlot and Petit Verdot, but he couldn't get hold of those varieties in those early years. So what he did do was he substituted for the known red variety in the Hunter, which was Shiraz. So in the early days, the vineyard was essentially 50% Cabernet, 50% Shiraz. Now, what I'm still, 14 years on, I'm still learning stuff about the place, but what I'm still coming to terms with is how the site doesn't particularly lend itself to Shiraz. It lends itself to Cabernet. I have said to people, it wouldn't matter what you grew here, you would make, if we planted Shiraz, we would make graveyard Shiraz, or we would make, like top-end Shiraz. But the reality is that site lends itself better to Cabernet. So it was 100% Cabernet right the way through until 1993. And then in the late 80s, they planted some Petit Verdot and some Merlot, such that the red wine now is largely Cabernet, about 60%, then usually up to about 20% Petit Verdot and about 10% Merlot and 10% Shiraz, which is a curious blend. It's a Bordeaux blend with a bit of Shiraz thrown in, with the token Hunter Shiraz, but it works. It works.